Hello and welcome to this episode. Within this episode, we're going to talk about Artemis and also the rite of passage linked to Artemis called the Arkteia. Now, when it comes to nature-linked goddesses, well, there is Artemis, who is an ancient Greek goddess often associated with the moon, wild animals, and the hunt. She was one of the 12 Olympian gods and goddesses, and was the daughter of Zeus and Leto, and the twin sister of Apollo. Apollo being one of the divine twin figures in a masculine and feminine split, Artemis being the other side of said figure. As we already established, one of her names being Artemis Lycaena, which translates to she-wolf. And she was a protector of the wild animals of the forest and cattle of the farmers. She was originally worshipped as a goddess of death and fertility in the Peloponnese. She was also connected to death, especially of women in labor, or to breastfeeding and young children. As a goddess of the hunt, Artemis was often depicted with a bow and arrows, and was believed to have the power to control wild animals, being a later manifestation of the mistress of the beast type figure, where she was also associated with the moon and was sometimes depicted as a lunar goddess. In addition to her role as a huntress and moon goddess, Artemis was also associated with childbirth and fertility. Artemis being an important goddess in ancient Greek religion and mythology, and her worship was widespread throughout the Greek world. She was often worshipped in sanctuaries in wild and remote areas, and her followers included hunters, young girls, and women seeking fertility and protection during childbirth. She was often worshipped in sanctuaries in wild and remote areas, and her followers included hunters, young girls, and women seeking fertility and protection during childbirth. And in Jungian psychology, the huntress archetype is an archetypal image that represents the instinctual and independent aspect of the feminine psyche. The huntress is often depicted as a skilled hunter and tracker, able to navigate through the wilderness and overcome obstacles in pursuit of her goals. And according to Jungian theory, the huntress archetype is closely related to the animus, which is the masculine aspect of the female psyche. The animus, in that sense, represents the conscious or rational side of the psyche, while the huntress represents the instinctual or intuitive side. Together, these two archetypes create a dynamic tension that helps to balance and integrate the feminine psyche, where the huntress archetype is often associated with themes of independence, self-reliance, and assertiveness. Much like the wolf archetype also links to instinct, intuition, independence, self-reliance, and assertiveness. Also being seen as a powerful figure who is not afraid to take risks and pursue her goals with determination and skill. In this sense, the huntress can be seen as a positive archetype that empowers women to embrace their own strength and independence. She's also often associated with the natural world and the cycles of life and death. In that sense, she is a powerful figure who is not afraid to confront the harsh realities of nature and the human experience. Where at Sparta, Epidauros Limera and Sicyon, she was Lady of the Lake, and was worshipped in mermaid shape, where throughout the Peloponnese, Artemis was bearing such epithets as Limnaea and Limnatis. Artemis supervised waters and lush wild growth, attended by nymphs of the wells and springs. Naiads, so water nymphs. Where there was also the Tauropolia festival at Halea Arapenides in Attica, where they honored Artemis Tauropolis, bull goddess. Next to there being at the sanctuary at Brauron, an ancient wooden image of Artemis, where she is called Artemis Taurea or Tauros, meaning bull. This being different versions and connections linked to Artemis. And the bull was also the ancient sacrifice she received as Artemis Tauropos, where Pausanias wrote that in front of a temple of Apollo at Argos, there's a pit with a relief representing a fight between a bull and a wolf, and with them a maiden throwing a rock at the bull. The maiden is thought to be Artemis, connecting again a bull with her, next to the link to the wolf and her brother Apollo, where further the Naiads are a type of female spirit or nymph that were also linked to her, presiding over fountains, wells, springs, streams, brooks, and other bodies of fresh water. Naiads were often the object of archaic local cults, worshipped as essential to humans. Boys and girls at coming-of-age ceremonies dedicated their locks of hair to the local Naiad of the spring. Such things also happened in the sacred springs of Artemis. In places like Lerna, their waters and ritual cleansing were credited with magical medical properties as well, and around these springs were then often trees that were considered sacred to Artemis. And these species of trees chosen for Artemis were wild ones. The willow, from which the image of Artemis Orthia at Sparta was carved, is best known, but many other species were associated with her. Cedar, myrtle, laurel, the special tree of her brother Apollo, wild fig, nut-bearing trees, and pine. And the very name Artemis may have derived from the Greek term for a sanctuary, temenos, plural temene. Artemis being the goddess of untouched nature, where dances of maidens representing three nymphs, dryads, were especially common in Artemis's worship as goddess of the tree cult, a role especially popular in the Peloponnese. And dryads were originally the spirits of oak trees, linking them symbolically also to the thunder god, who is known as the Lord of Oaks, but the name was later applied to all tree nymphs. It was believed that they lived only as long as the trees they inhabited. Nymphs, within this context, represented her priestesses, where the maidens are the young girls going through the Arkteia rite of passage linked to bears. An old Greek hymn about Artemis also reveals this link. It says, "And give me 60 daughters of Oceanus for my choir, all 9 years old, all maidens yet ungirdled. And give me for handmaidens 20 nymphs of Amnisus." But coming now to Brauron itself, there is also evidence that during the 5th century BC, an Artemisian initiation festival at Brauron was celebrated every year. There's, as Harris and Platzner pointed out, in Artemis, goddess of conservation, then also evidence to indicate that the site at Brauron was flourishing as far back as the Neolithic and Mycenaean periods. During the festival, young girls, and it seems that on occasion young boys, would gather to celebrate Artemis, the great she-bear. They did this by assuming the image of bears themselves. Vases that have been found at the site depict images of races and dancing to honor the goddess. This specific dance, called the Arkteia, served as a rite of passage linked to Artemis, the bear in this ritual being her sacred animal. And this sacred ritual in ancient Greece involved young girls entering a transitional phase of their lives and connecting with their feminine power. This rite of passage represented the journey from childhood to adulthood and the awakening of feminine wisdom and strength. And the site at Brauron consisted of a sacred grove with a temple dedicated to Artemis, with buildings in which the young girls and priestesses would stay in, and upkeep. And the ritual itself was done in the sacred grove, often at dusk or even at night, with torches lighting up the sacred grove, with the flickering torchlight amidst the ancient sacred trees. And the dance itself was made up of slow, ceremonial steps meant to imitate the movements of a bear and was performed to a tune from an aulos, so a double flute, which also has been linked to her brother Apollo in his initiation rites. And the young girls also carried baskets of figs. And there was also a special dress associated with this sacred rite as well, which was the krokotos. And this was a saffron robe associated with girls taking part in the Brauronian maturation rites. During the dance, the robe would be shed, which symbolized transition into womanhood. The krokotos as a robe had since the more ancient Neolithic period replaced bear fur, and thus came to symbolize their connection to the bear. And by moving like bears, the Arktoi heightened their sense of identification with the animal. Where from a Jungian perspective, the Arkteia dance and ritual associated with Artemis and the bear holds symbolic significance and represents a rite of passage and initiation into the feminine instinctual nature. By assuming the image of bears themselves and performing specific rituals, the participants sought to establish a deep connection with the bear and the instinctual aspects associated with it. This embodiment of bear-like movements allowed the Arktoi, so the young girls, to intensify their identification with the animal. In the Jungian framework, this process of identification represents an integration of the instinctual nature, tapping into the primal and wild aspects of the feminine psyche through this sacred dance, helping to strengthen the connection to instinct and the inner flame of the self. And by embracing and expressing the bear-like qualities, the participants were able to access a deeper understanding of their own instinctual nature and tap into the archetypal energy represented by the bear. And the presence of the krokotos, a saffron robe associated with the maturation rites in Brauron, is also significant. Because in the more ancient Neolithic period, bear fur was used. But over time, like I said, it was replaced by the krokotos robe. And this transition from bear fur to the symbolic robe suggests a shift from a literal connection to the bear to a more symbolic one. And the krokotos as a garment became a representation of the connection between the Arktoi and the bear, signifying their initiation into the mysteries of the feminine. Next to a shedding of the robe, symbolizing the shedding of the persona, the societal masks, revealing the authentic nature of the individual. Former Arktoi, young women who had taken part in the ritual, had a role in the following Arkteia as amphipoloi, which are former bears serving a matronly role in support of the new bears, and was also considered a vivid personal experience for young girls who took part in rites with new acquaintances their own age and former bears of Artemis. This allowed them to form a shared identity with their peers, whilst making their transition into adulthood less daunting. And the sacred service was restricted and was only for women. It is known that the members of the service took pride in having been a bear, as it means they are capable of aiding the polis in war matters. The women who had gone through the rituals would fall within the domain of the goddess Athena, being a woman of the tribe in the Proto-Indo-European sense. Athena being both connected to weaving and textile artistry, but also to the tradition of warrior women. These women would give counsel on matters of war, when to start or end a war. They also functioned as priestesses in connection to different goddesses, often playing a role when it comes to war. The weaving and textile artistry side also being a highly valued role within Proto-Indo-European society. And one other role that women would sometimes take was to help the young women through the rites of passage as priestesses. Generally, though, for the women going through the Arkteia in the course of their service to Artemis, they would maintain the buildings at the shrine, which also prepared them for their future household duties. Next to them, discovering a wilder environment in contrast to the city, which facilitated learning about respecting nature and animals. And a major part of the Arkteia was then also the presence of animal symbolism. The symbolism served to give the children, aged 5 to 10 years old, an introduction to environmental education and concern for nature. This is due in large part to Artemis's reputation as a protector of wildlife. She was a defender of wild animals and was believed to punish those who killed them for objectionable reasons harshly. She was also identified with wildlife, and many areas were designated as sanctuaries, where the hunting or killing of wildlife was either prohibited or restricted. In that sense, Artemis was symbolic of ethical principles of hunting and wildlife management. And these principles stemmed from the belief of primitive hunters and gatherers who believed that living things were sentient, intelligent beings deserving of respect. Due to these factors, when embarking on hunts, hunters needed to be mindful of the respect and reverence due to nature and wildlife. And Artemis was in ancient Greece also seen as the protector of girls and young women, and she would protect them, but also nature, sacred groves and animals in the form of a fierce she-bear. The young girls would go to her temple to be educated on this and the environment. How to hunt respectfully, for instance, where young boys too would go there to learn about these things. But the boys would also go through their own rituals as well later as teens, connected to Apollo, where the girls would do their sacred bear dance, embodying the fierce she-bear, incorporating both feminine and masculine traits to become independent women who can hold their own. The girls' nakedness was a crucial accumulation of their passage into adulthood within this rite, and they were thought to have been newly born through this death and rebirth ritual through the dance, into a life very different from their childhood, where upon completion of their service, the girls were thought to have gained the mandate of Artemis to re-enter society as marriageable women. Yet the she-bear is also connected to the Great Mother as a symbol in other cultures as well, symbolizing the feminine form of her, protecting the innocent. In the more older myths, she is also linked to Ursa Major, and she was a figure that presided over the transition between young girls to adult women, where the first part of Artemis, Ark, derives from Arktos, which means bear, and also occurs in the names or titles Arklos and Arkas. The second element in the goddess's name, Tem, comes from temno, a verb meaning to cut or to divide, demarcate or set aside, which is the root of temenos, which means sacred enclosure. Thus the etymology of the name Artemis would be Arktemnis, bear sanctuary, or more fully paraphrased, she who establishes or protects the bear sanctuary. And such sanctuaries were commonly and most characteristically groves of trees. But Artemis also held sacred springs of water, streams, and rivers, where 20 river nymphs were her attendants, which have been linked to her priestesses. On top of this, clearing obstructions or pollution from a stream was also seen as an act of respect to Artemis. Where in ancient Greece, rules were established to protect the groves of Artemis and other gods, with the aim of preserving the sanctuaries from damage, and were enforced by both civil and religious penalties. Wildlife in these sacred lands was also safeguarded, with hunting and fishing either forbidden or strictly regulated, and these groves were numerous and extensive, providing protection for many species over an extended period of time. In that sense, the presence of Artemis in the Greek pantheon prevented human intrusion into the sacred forests and aided in the preservation of numerous wilderness areas as religious reserves. Yet Artemis, the protector of wildlife who also happens to be a huntress, requires a little bit of an explanation for modern minds. However, this seeming paradox is not an issue in primal hunting societies, which view animals not as game or enemies to be slain, but as powerful beings whose spiritual protectors must be appeased. And although the cultural attitudes of classical Greek hunters differ from those of their ancestors, Artemis is derived from the religion of primal hunters, and they're called preserved beliefs and practices from Greece's early forebears. This connection of Mistress of the Beasts connects Artemis Also to similar figures like Holda, who had a similar function and was seen as a helpful figure that aided the wild hunt. And in animistic cultures, such a figure is a common symbol, like I said earlier in the book, where gradually from protector of wild animals, Artemis also became a protector of cattle, then of civil life, and finally of politics as Soitera, savior, hegemone, ruler, and agoreia, of the agora, marking her progression of mistress of the beast to a sovereignty-type goddess, where an unwritten ancestral Artemisian hunter's code, quote-unquote, may also be inferred, which demanded respect for animals and plants, and allowed the killing of game only when necessary for human sustenance. In that sense, the commandments of Artemis, or the rules and rituals followed by hunters through tradition and custom, were intended to demonstrate reverence for life and to repair the breach caused by its taking. Needless killing and cruelty were prohibited not only out of sentiment and compassion for animals, but also as a sacred obligation, which was also imposed by the ancient religion's powerful and terrible sanctions. And this obligation had the support of both the hunter's subconscious and Greek traditional culture, where other elements of ancient Greek religion, such as the worship of Pan, had similar conservation effects to the worship of Artemis.